Saturday the 15th of January 1995. After taking the overnight train to Boston, I walked in the early morning across roads, past car parks, over bridges, to eventually arrive at the station that would take me to Salem, Massachusetts, famous for witches and, I'm not sure what else. It's kind of strange, isn't it, that we totally associate the place with witches. How do we know about this connection? Is it somehow ingrained in our DNA? These two things can never be separated. Why can't it reinvent itself like Madonna, or go through a different phase, or look, or become known for jam or flower arranging? Oh, maybe that's not going to have the same drawl. The local station was rather more seedy than Amtrak, and the train didn't leave for a while, so I ate breakfast at the McDonald's opposite, where a somewhat loud and overbearing man, laden down with gold chains and rings, wiry, with a crinkled face and a moustache, was telling stories to impress a lady, each more extreme than the last, and at a volume that meant everyone else in the restaurant could hear too, which consisted of just me. And so, after an entertaining or irritating 20 minutes, depending on which way you look at it, I left and boarded my train, arriving in Salem on a very grey and overcast day. The snow was melting, piled high on the sides of the roads, but not nice, crisp snow. Dirty, slushy snow on the edge of the streets. Bored kids wandered around, scrunching up what was left, with that look in their eyes like they'd really like to throw it at me, but didn't. I suppose what you don't expect is that Salem is a port. The house of the Seven Gables was built on the shore of Salem Harbour in 1668 and made famous by the novel of the same name by Nathaniel Hawthorne. And the wind blew through the rigging of the boats, hitting against the masts, making a relentless, echoing tap-tap-tapping sound, creating a rhythmic symphony in the melancholy grey. As I looked up at the house of the Seven Gables, a cat sat hunched by a fence, its long hair being pushed aside by the wind. I was here in Salem out of season, the peak season I imagine to be Halloween, and the odd visitor can be seen looking for somewhere to go. The Salem Witch Museum was open, and it boasted a 3D dramatic show with life-size models. It all took place in one large darkened hall. The model set surrounding me was lit up and accompanied by character voices and sound effects. And as I sat in the darkness, waiting for the show to begin, I remember hearing music that seemed strangely inappropriate. Good day, sunshine. This is not what I was expecting. But then I realised the tape recorder in my bag had switched itself on. Many of the museums and waxworks were closed as it was out of season, but I could still explore the gloom and visited many of the historic old buildings. It was certainly atmospheric, and I pushed myself to sketch, although my fingers were very cold. On the corner of Essex Street is the old witch house, built in 1692, and said that the preliminary hearings of the witchcraft cases would have been held here. And there it is. It was an odd place, and I passed an equally odd man wearing a cardboard box on his head and carrying a multitude of plastic bags, spinning tightly around each finger. It certainly was a haunting place. I visited the Salem graveyard beside a grey, weatherboarded house, with a lamp glowing dimly in one of the windows. The ground was darkly pale and drained of colour, a place that could certainly inspire a few ghost stories. Famous people buried here include Captain Richard Moore of the original Mayflower Pilgrims, who died in 1692, aged 84. As well as one of the judges from the Salem witch trials, Judge John Hawthorne. Also great-great-grandfather of Nathaniel Hawthorne, who I understand added the W to his name to distance himself from his callous ancestor. I walked back in the cold and dark to wait for the train back to Boston. I enjoyed wandering around Salem, the historic buildings and the melancholy, like being in a painting by Edvard Munch. Don't know what to think about this place really, the whole famous for witches thing. I mean, the whole event was based on a lie anyway. There wasn't any real witches, just people abusing their positions of power with an excuse of witchcraft, taking out their own twisted frustrations on others. But by remembering this, It'll hopefully remind people to behave a bit better in the future and not to get involved in witch hunts with mob mentality. And then the train pulled in. When on board, across the tannoy, the conductor had a very low, gravelly voice. He said, "Don't be disturbed, but we will be experiencing a few minutes' darkness on our journey when we go through the tunnel. The lights don't work in the tunnel." And on cue, the lights went off and stayed off for what may be considered to be a comfortable amount of time, which seemed like more than 10 minutes. When the lights did come on, I was expecting to see everyone relieved of their jewellery or finding everyone replaced by a pod person. Well, if you've seen the film The Invasion of the Body Snatchers, you know what I'm talking about. On the way back through Boston, I stopped at the place where everyone knows your name, the Cheers Bar, made famous by a long-running television programme of the same name. And with trepidation I walked down the steps and went in nervously. I entered to be greeted by smiling people, but it wasn't the normal Carla or Sam or Woody. There were photos of all the stars on the walls, including Ted Danson wearing his glasses, and I realised it was different from the studio set, as the style was the same, but there was no centre bar, and of course the main difference was that the door opened outwards instead of inwards, due to the Boston fire regulations. Waiting at the Boston station, my evening meal consisted of spreading peanut butter onto crisps, or potato chips as they say here. Well, it was a budget trip. Then a homeless man, whilst doing the rounds of the seated travellers, waiting for trains, upon the sight of me and this desperately cobbled together meal, refrained from asking me for any loose change.